if you recall from last time, or if you weren't here from last time, we took a raw CSV from the Orlando Open Data Portal on OPD Crimes, the crime database. We imported it into a Jupyter notebook. We did a bunch of cleaning with it using pandas, exported a clean CSV, and then turned that clean CSV into an SQLite database that is a database stored locally on your machine as a single file. And we're going to use this file now as the backend, or the data source for our web app. So, thankfully, most of it is just string data, so it's going to make it very easy. We have a timestamp in here, an int for our ID, and some floats for our coordinate pairs. So we're not doing any kind of fancy, we don't need any fancy data types for this, which is going to make it very easy for us to go ahead and create this app. So let's jump right into it. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder here so we can get started. Just going to call it web, keep it very simple. And you guys don't need to put this in here, but I'm going to put it in for now. If you haven't seen this yet, requirements.txt is the generally accepted way currently of including or specifying what your Python package dependencies are. And we're going to need to install Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy to start with. I'll get version numbers in there very soon. Pull this down.
Michael, you recorded on here.
Yeah. Yep. Good. So I'm using Conda environments. I'm already in my environments. If you've been doing that so far, great. Continue to. If you've not, we can talk about it later. But to get the two libraries we need to start off with, we can do pip install Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy. Yes.
Do you have all of those in the requirements?
The two of these.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
The libraries?
Yeah. So
okay.
they're listed on top. Now, if you want to do this, if you want to do install from requirements.txt, the way you do that is instead of listing them out individually in the command line, you would just do -r and then the name of. Oh, I actually need to get into the cd web. There we go. So now pip install -r requirements.txt. And it will run through everything in your requirements file, just as though you were doing a package.json on Node. So it successfully installed all of our dependencies. I'm going to do a quick pip list so I can get the actual versions out of here. And this is, as you can see, this includes Jupyter and everything else. I'm using the same environment that we've been using for this whole workshop. So 1.1 and 2.4. This tilde equals means as long as the version is similar enough to this version, it will work just fine. And I find that if you do not need to pin an exact version number, this is a nice middle ground to having, okay, it's reasonably not going to change, but I can still benefit from any bug fixes that they push.
So you just put that next to the...
Yep.
Install SQL and
So, okay, so let's that's a great question. So this is me jumping directly into things. Let's actually look at what Flask is, because that's the web framework that we're going to be using today. There we go. So Flask. arguably speaking, there are two main web frameworks, or the two most popular web frameworks for the Python language would be Django and Flask. There are others like Bottle, Tornado. I like using Quart, which is an async, one of the up-and-coming asyncs, along with many of them because they haven't been around for too long. But Flask is, or Django is a batteries included framework. So you install Django and you have your ORM, which is your database management. You have your view manager, you have your templating engine, you have everything you need just in that one install, and then you can add more things onto it. But Flask is what we would class as a micro framework. So it has just enough what you need to get your routing done and your templating done, because it includes a library called Jinja 2, which is a HTML templating engine. But if you need to include an ORM, then you need to do pip install. You need to include Flask Alchemy, which is a version of SQL Alchemy packaged specifically to work well with Flask. If you need account management, there's Flask User. If you need migration assistance, there's Flask Migrate, and I believe that uses Alembic under the hood. But these are all things where if you don't need it, then you don't install it, and your install in total is smaller. But if you do need it, you add it in selectively, you integrate them together, and now you have exactly what you need. Flask, because it is a micro framework, and like other micro frameworks, has a really easy hello world example, whereas Django has it's a bit more involved to get a hello world example up and running. But if you are planning to build a web app that's going to be huge, to a point, it's recommended to start with Django. If you're going to have something that is small and either stays small or scales well, Flask or some other micro framework is a better choice. Let's actually look at what Flask looks like. And as always, the best place to start is a quick start. So, like I said, the hello world example is really short. It's like print hello world, just with only 5 more lines and one of them is empty. So we import the main Flask object here. This is our actual app. Name just applies the name of gives the name of the file as the name of the app. Not totally necessary. You can name it whatever you want. Flask is a function view based web framework. So we create a def hello world function, and it can return a string. It can return a response object as long as it can be converted into the body of what gets sent back. Doesn't matter what we return, it can parse it, which is great. And then to specify where actually in our web server this function, or what route this function is supposed to fulfill, we specify app.route using this decorator syntax, and this specifies that it's going to be the root. It's going to be the index of our site. Really easy Flask app. All we really need to do here is, now that we have Flask installed, we can really just copy paste this into our, for the sake of keeping things simple, we can just do app.py. And it just looks like that. And if you want to get this without typing everything in, you can just do search for Flask docs and then quick start. Everyone see the code okay? I can make it a little bigger. So now that we have this code, there are two ways that we can actually serve our app, because our code is not running yet. We could either do, if you remember from the last time that we were here and the time before that, we have this if name equals main syntax. And just a quick refresher, this is just saying this code block here, which in previous sessions we just put a call to our main function or something like that. This code block in here will only run if app.py is the thing we are running directly, as though we typed in Python app.py. That's the only time it would run. We could do something like that where it would be something akin to app.serve, and then we would give it a port number. However, that is not the recommended way to do it. The best way to serve up this Flask file for development, at least, is using the Flask command line utility. One of the nice things with Python, just making things easy for you, similar to how other languages can do this as well, is when you install a library, it has the option to install a command line utility along with it. We used this last time with Jupyter, because we just did pip install Jupyter, and then we can magically type in Jupyter Notebook. It would spin up a notebook server for us. With Flask, we get a command line utility as well, where all we need to do is Flask run. And if we install any other libraries that have their own Flask command line utilities, they will appear in here as well. So at the very bare minimum, all we need to do is do this export Flask app equals app. And the syntax for this is it is looking for a Python module or file, and then we could either just leave it at app.py and it will look for a variable called app as our web app, or we can also explicitly say colon and then the name of the variable you are looking for is app. I find that being explicit leads to less bugs than being implicit, so I do prefer to use this. And if we rename this file main.py or mywebapp.py, this would be Flask app equals mywebapp colon app. And if you're not familiar with export is just setting a environment variable into our session. That way, when we do a Flask run, it will say, where's the Flask app? Oh, we already set where is the Flask app. I'm going to look exactly in that location. And then just one little extra thing, we can do this -p to specify the exact port number that we want it to run on. And I also find that being explicit here is better. If we go ahead and run that, you'll see that we have a development server. And the great use case for doing this Flask run as opposed to running it directly from our code is this development server will auto-reload our app whenever we make changes to the code. That's always great. Less time having to do Command-C, up, Enter. But if we Command or Control-click on this URL, this is just going to send us to localhost and the port 8000 that we specified before. Click. And at our root, we have hello world. We have a web server running locally on our machine. And just to show that it's going to auto reload, and change that to hello Python. Oh, no, debug mode is off. One more time. I believe the other one was, yeah, Flask end equals development. There's another way you can specify in your app settings debug equals true, and that should also do it. Let's run that again. Okay, yeah, debugger is active, so add more exclamation marks to the end. Restarted the server. There we go. Now it's working. Reload. Hello, Python. So that's all fine and dandy. We have a route, and we're just returning a string. Before we add in the database, let's just look a little bit more at our Flask instance here. Yeah. Okay. Okay, could not import app. What is your... make sure you're in web. You're in your web folder. Yeah. They got me before with the requirements file. Okay, so we have our index is returning a string currently, but we know we're going to add data in, so it would be really nice to be able to return a JSON response object as though we're an API response. That'd be pretty nice. So let's create a function called, let's just say data payload. Just being real creative here. And we can't quite do this. We can't return a dict object directly into our response. However, Flask has a lovely little helper function called JSONify. And that term should be pretty familiar to you if you've ever written Java, or not Java, JavaScript. So all we need to do is wrap this in JSONify. And that will return data. There's one more thing we need to do this. Can anyone spot it? We need to specify a route. So just app.route. All routes in Flask need to start with the root slash there, and we can just call that JSON. We save that, our server reboots itself. Reload this page, it still works. But then if we go to localhost 8000 JSON, we get our JSON payload.
Michael, have the debugger turned on or set up to restart the server?
Oh, yeah, so export Flask end equals development. There should also be a setting. I believe you can just put it in there. Let's. No.
Well, not you will have to do that on the
Yeah,
app
it'd
that
have to
run.
be. Yeah, it would have to be settings, and then. Yeah, thank you. Is that app.run? I was saying like serve. No, that's Django.
Oh.
Yep. We can also look very quickly at Jinja Templating, because it's nice to get something working, This is fine for a data payload. That's a little less useful if you were trying to tell people about how to use your website. So let's pull up the docs here for static files. Where are my Jinja? Rendering templates. There we go. So for our rendered, so we're going to do, in this example here, we're going to do two things new. We have our render template function, and we also have a URL routing URL routing parameter as opposed to the parameters list that we can use in this example. The first thing that we need to do is import render template, and then down here, let's actually start with our app.route. And for this example, we can just call it hello. We'll just say name as well. So we've specified a URL routing parameter called name. And implicitly in here, this is in there saying convert it to a string, but everything is a string coming in. If instead this were ID, we'd convert it to an int. But we have hello name, so we can have a hello function, and now we just use the exact same parameter, the parameter name there, and then because I like using all my fancy annotations, it is a type string. So all we need to do is return render template, and this returns a response object, just like JSONify. And we specify the file name, or our template file name, and then any keyword parameters that are going to be sent to that template. So let's just get this code, and then we'll look at exactly where this hello.html file is supposed to go. Yeah, no semicolons. All right. So that's all the code that we need. Jinja, the library is called Jinja, specifically Jinja 2. It is an HTML templating engine where we write mostly regular HTML code. And that lives in a templates folder. So we create a templates folder, and now we do hello.html. We can create our HTML file here. We're not going, for the sake of time, we're not going to get into things like creating a main, everything that has the head, and now we're putting in body components and extending different components. I have whole talks on the Orlando Python page about doing that. But to get this working, if you are not familiar with HTML, I'm going to keep it as bare bones as I possibly can, for the sake of time. But everything needs to live inside of an HTML tag. For the sake of consistency, I'm going to put a head in there that contains all of the information outside of the body of our page, but we're not going to put anything in there right now. All the things that you see on a web page actually live in a body one way or another. And then don't worry about the individual tag names if you're not familiar with them. And H1 is just a header of the greatest size. It just goes down numerical list from there. And a P is just a paragraph tag. Now here's where the templating comes in. So we can say hello to, and then we put in these double curly braces. This signals to Jinja that I am going to convert whatever is inside of here to text. So all we need to do is put the variable name in there, which we called name. And when this renders, whatever name we put in the URL is going to be put as is directly into this HTML file. So just to show what this is going to look like, if I come over here to hello and just say Python, Codex Workshop, hello to Python, just as is. And now that we have everything in place, let's very quickly just step through here. We specified a route. We're going to say hello, and then assign whatever gets included after hello, the hello routing slash, to a variable called name as a string. That gets passed by Flask into our function as though it were a regular Python function, because it is. We are specifying name equals name, so we're keeping the same thing, but if we wanted to call this something different, like say username, then in our template we would say username instead of just name. We specify by string the name of the template that we want to use. It looks in the templates folder for that file and then just insert or does a replace there, and it would put, in this case, Python directly into it. There's a bunch of other things that we can do with this. Just to quickly show it off, I can give this a default value of, let's just say none to be super explicit. We can also add multiple routes to this. So if I do app.route hello with nothing afterwards, then currently, if I, without saving that file, by the way, if I just do hello, that URL is not found because it's not a registered route. It is looking for / something following hello. But if I rename this, or if I save this with this new app.route just hello on top, if I try to run this again, it does work because it's now a valid route, but it's using this default value of none here because one of our routes doesn't include that parameter. So it just passes none directly into our template. Now we can either fix this in the code or we can fix this in the template. So we can do another one of these, or it's actually not a double there. It is a curly brace %, in and out. This signifies to Jinja that this is about to be a control statement. So we can do if name as though we're writing Python into here in one way or another. So we can do if name, none is not a truthy value, so it won't go into this. We could also do if name is none to be more explicit, but we can just do if name, then put name in there, another control statement, else, and then I can just write regular HTML here, say is you wonderful people, and then because it needs to know where the end of our raw HTML writability is, we then also need to put an endif, just like if you were in writing BASIC. BASIC uses endifs.
Oh, well,
And
in Ruby you have to end the functions and the stuff.
or like Bash using phi or phi or fit. I've heard everyone pronounce it different ways, just because it's what is if backwards? Fit, phi, phi. Phi is phi, so whatever. And if you want this to be more explicit, because HTML is not white space, unlike Python doesn't really care about the white space, we can create all of these wonderful indented blocks. And this is actually way more important, or is way more important for code readability if you are, say, doing 4-item in list, add new list item elements into your template. It makes way more sense if you're doing like that. But now this kind of looks like Python, just a little bit. And I do find that sometimes, not always, even if this is in debug mode, sometimes you need to exit out of it. It worked fine just there, but there are times where, well, why isn't this updating? Let me just exit the server and have it reload all the templates. But that worked fine. So we have on our empty route here, hello to you wonderful people, which is our catch-all case with our else statement there. But then if I go to hello Pythonistas, it's now showing Pythonistas. So that is some backtracking just a little bit. Now that we've seen everything working, Flask is designed. Both Flask and Django are designed around an application control scheme called MVC, Model View Controller. This is still the most popular type of any kind of GUI application. All that means is that our data source is separate from our GUI representation, and then we have a controller in the middle of it that is marrying the two together. So in this case, what we did here with this hello.html with our Jinja templating is we handled all of our view-specific use cases, and the code is completely separate in our HTML template file here. In our app.py, this function is our controller. Its job is to fetch the data, which we'll do in a second here once we start using our OPD data, and make sure format it in such a way that we can then feed it into whatever output we need, be it our render template or a JSONify. And then our view turns all of that information that was collected by our controller into what gets returned to the user as an HTML file, as a JSON payload, whatever it be. Any questions before we go on? Because the next thing we're going to do is import SQL Alchemy and start making our model. Yeah, I'm sure people are catching up. And
for the Jinja templating, I know you can do like if statements and loops and stuff, but how much kind of logic can you shove into that, and should you?
So there are definitely times when you can shove logic into here, and we'll look at that when we start, especially if we do querying where we want to put multiple entries. We will definitely be using Jinja templating to loop through the data that we provide. If we have a list of 3 items, if our query matches 3 items from our database, we'll send a list of all 3 items directly into our template, and then the template is in charge of 4 item in the list I was given. Here's the representation of what that item should look like when rendered. And we only have to write that once. We don't have to write it 3 times or n number of times for the number of items that we give it. So we've already installed SQL Alchemy. And we have this at.py, but we're actually going to split this off a little bit. We're going to create a file called models.py. This is where we're going to have our database model representations, our ORM here, object resource mapper. But the first thing we need to do back in app.py is from Flask SQL Alchemy import SQL Alchemy. If you were here last time, you might have remembered that, let's look very quickly back at our models.py file from last time. So we had, from SQL Alchemy import create engine. This is how we created / connected to our SQLite database. And then we had to declare a base object. And then we could finally create our crime table with our table structure. And we had some other stuff on top of it. And then finally down here, we populated the whole thing. And I was very rusty, if you recall as well, because I can't tell you the last time that I've just used the native SQL Alchemy library directly before 3 weeks ago. And that's because the syntax is different when you are using SQL Alchemy through these web frameworks. Like I said, they play nicely, and we don't have to do as much micromanagement of them. All we need to do here is do db equals SQL Alchemy, and we just supply the app. That's it. We've now initialized a database, or yeah. There should be some settings in here as to specify which database we need to connect to, but I'm blanking on that. So let's look up the documentation.
Yeah.
Usually for me it's just database URI. That's it.
Here you go.
Got that. So instead of going through the Flask documentation right now, we're going to go into Flask SQL Alchemy. Quick start. There we go. app.config, that's how they're doing it. This is where I would normally have a handler script so I can import from an environment variable, because if you're writing an application, do not put your connection strings in your source code. Do not do that. But since our file is local anyway, included in the repository, might as well. Yes. So when you are in a production environment, the connection strings to your databases, they're just like API keys. You want to keep them secret, keep them safe. Do not put them, do not check them into the source code that you put into GitHub or any other kind of public repository. You want to have them living in your environment in a vault somewhere that your application can pull out, can pull the data from securely. However you do it, just don't put it in source. We're going to put it in source because we don't care for this, because it's an SQLite file. There's no connection, no secret connection credentials to get into it. Now, from last time, we have our crimes to escalate.
You said URI,
URI, yes. I'm just copying our URI that we used last time. Boom, there we go. And for the sake of not duplicating our database, I'm actually going to go back up, go into data, and that's our actual location. Okay, app.config, SQL Alchemy database URI, and then our SQLite, 3 slashes, double dot to go up one directory. We go into the data directory so we can point it at crimes.sqlite. If you don't have that data directory, if you just downloaded the SQLite file by itself, just get rid of the double dot in data. Just point it to the file. I'm sure we'll have one person with that problem. But when we supply this app into our SQL Alchemy init here, it looks at this config and returns a database connection object, or this DB is our go-to object for anything that we need to do with our database now, which is great. Makes things really easy. And you can see that here because unlike last time where we had to import columns and all the different types that we were using, all we do is just preface db dot blank. So we don't have to do all of those the explicit imports. So let's get into our models.py. Now we need to do from app import db. Yeah, so we have a models.py that is separate from the one we created in our data folder from our last workshop. Just save that, make sure it's not giving us any errors. DB exists, great. And actually, I'm going to pull up in our side pane here our original models.py so that we can reference our other database here. So we're again going to create a crime class / table, and instead of base, because we don't have to worry about this declarative base object like we did last time. All we just do is specify that this is a model. It has a column called ID, which is a db dot column, which is type db dot integer, and it is our primary key. So far, the only thing that we've had to do is add db in front of these, and that's going to be consistent, because instead of from SQL Alchemy import all these different things, we're just prefacing everything with our db dot. We could do that with our remaining columns here. I'm even just going to include the repr as well. So just need to do db dot in front of all of this mess. And I'm sure this is probably going to bite me when we run it, but I will let that be. Oh, joy, oh, joy, oh, joy, Pylint. See if I can make that shut up. Or,
It's not gonna let you.
I think it's Flask Pylint?
You-
No.
It's just Python.
Well, I already have Pylint installed. There's a Flask extension. Or Flask or an SQL. Yeah, okay. There's
There it is.
Pylint Flask. I think there might also be. Actually, I think it might be Flask SQL Alchemy as well. Yes, there is. Okay. Haha, and they all disappeared.
Nope.
No, they didn't. Grr. So, yeah. The magic with this DB object is it's referencing through it's passing through everything to SQL Alchemy, but the way that these static linting tools work is they just read in the object as is and see if a member exists in this particular example, which it doesn't because it's just passing through, and it makes it very mad. So instead of looking at all of this lovely red tape, what pilot no member, I'm just going to disable it. That's all I need to do. Okay, I shut it up. That isn't going to help me if I am actually missing something, but we'll get there. Okay, so some other things that we can do. You'll see that we're just passing in, or for the most part, we're just passing in string, float. We're not initializing any of these things. If we wanted to, you can see here in this, they're using string with 80. That's just specifying the maximum length of that column, that the string values that can be put in there. You can say that we can have unique constraints in there, which we probably can and should put in there. And we can also say things can be nullable, but we removed anything that had a null value when we cleaned up this data. Although, if we were managing this database and we were allowing people to post new data into here, we would want to have those constraints in there. So just for the sake of argument, we already have our ID, by setting it as a primary key, is already going to be guaranteed unique. But our case number can also be, or should also be, unique if we were doing that. So we can also just put unique equals true in there. It's just adding a constraint into the database. This is actually the thing that might bite me when we connect to our table. Let's just see. All right. So if we just run our Flask app again, let's see what deprecation warning you're giving me. SQL Alchemy track modifications. Yes. Okay, so interesting. Does not matter to what we're doing today, but that's interesting to know. This is just saying that your migration suite should do this instead of us. That's all. Okay. So we have our models file there. I can get rid of our reference and instead pull up our app. So we can create a new route on here. We can say app.route is, let's call it crimes for now. No, it doesn't take anything. And to start off with, let's just make sure we can make sure that our new route works by just returning a string that will be displayed in our web browser. I have the after adding in SQL Alchemy, I restarted the server. So if we go back to our web page over here and I replace hello with crimes, crime. So we have our route in there. Now we're in here. We need to import our model into our app.py. So we can do from models import crime. Now down here, we can get a let's just get a count for now. So we can do crime dot query dot all. I believe we string together all and count, and I'm just going to return count. Or actually, I believe I need to stringify count because that should be an int. I'm curious if I can just do query.count. I don't think so. But it will give me a big, lovely error if I do. There we go. So here's our error page. You shouldn't. I was expecting this to show up, but this is a great thing to show. When you are in development / debug mode, if debug equals true, this page will pop up if any error occurs when you are debugging your web app. Okay. So we got our stack trace in here and leads all the way down to
9.3.
oh, cannot import named DB from app. That's also not good. Oh, I believe I know why. So this is more of a Python minutia sort of deal. Import order matters. If we go line by line, which Python does, we import Flask. That's all great. We import our SQL Alchemy. That's also great. Then we attempt to import crime. Well, it runs over here to our models.py file and says, from app import DB. At this point in our file, DB does not exist. This has bitten me many a time. So just to make this run, we can move this down here. And if we rerun this, hopefully I'll get a different error. Okay. Now we actually have the let's find it in here. List one. Okay. Here's the line where I thought we were going to get that error from before. But yes, import order matters. So we are putting our import down here because over in this file here, we are importing something that didn't yet exist. Now, normally when you are if you're setting up a healthy many-file web app for these microframeworks, instead of doing -web, we might just create a folder here. I'm just going to call it crimes, and then we would have in here an init.py, like we were creating a Python module, and then inside of here we would have app equals this, db equals this, and then instead of having our views, our view functions in there, we would have a file called views.py. Frankly, now that I'm describing this, I think we should just make it that way.
It's like, wow, I'm
Yeah.
so smart.
So here's, this is a lovely little example of how a hello world differs from a well thought out application. Django as a batteries included app, by the time you make a hello world work with Django, your file structure is already set up where you can just start building apps and never need to change it. If you make a hello world using these micro frameworks, if you just try putting everything into that same file again, like we kind of started doing and then separate out for the models.py, things balloon, and that's not very good architecture. So instead, let's just make this work properly. All I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my app.py in here. We're going to rename it, by the way. I'm going to drag my models into here, and I'm going to drag the templates into here. So our new folder structure in our web folder here, the base is just a folder called crimes and a requirements.txt. This is exactly what it would look like if we were just creating a repository just with this information in here, as opposed to having a workshop repository with essentially a bunch of smaller repositories in there anyway. And then inside of our crimes, we have our templates folder, which includes our hello.html. We have an init.py file. We're going to rename this app.py to views.py. And we have our models.py. Well, everyone good on the structure?
You're just copying Django right now. Cool.
Yeah, except this is the entire web app.
Oh God.
We don't have our managed. We don't have managed.py
You don't have
or
that. Like if you're gonna go to the Tovo.
frankly, this is how a lot of them are set up anyway. If it ain't broken, don't fix it.
There you go.
The Jinja framework template reminds me of handlebars in JavaScript.
Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yes,
You'll find a lot of similarities.
On ES5 or 6 is when the JavaScript started copying Python's import statements. It was working for them. Might as well bring it over here.
Yeah. And then Python takes things from other languages like, Python takes things like async and await was taken in from another language.
JavaScript.
Yeah.
That was JavaScript. The exact same
and the
syntax.
Oh goodness, what was it called? The function annotations with the colons and the dash greater than sign making the arrow. It was taken, or it looks like it was lifted out of Swift as well.
Arrow functions also from JavaScript, but I didn't know Swift had those.
Well, Swift had Swift. They for ES6 they do the equal sign greater than for the function.
Oh.
Yeah, if this and this function,
Mm-hmm.
Closure. Okay, so I'll actually pull that up because I still love function annotations anyway. I'm going to close this just for a second. So all of this, I'm going to selectively take some stuff out of here, and we're going to put this into inits. From Flask, import Flask. And from Flask SQL Alchemy import SQL Alchemy. Then the last line in here would be from dot import views. Because if we don't import views, we don't have any views attached to the app when it tries to run it.
Pause you a second. Did you import lines 4 and 5? I mean, copy and paste.
Yeah.
From views?
Yeah. So we get rid of this line here, and then we get rid of our Flask there, and then we can actually just move all of that up there. So crimes init.py looks like this. We have the same thing we did before with Flask and SQL Alchemy. This file here is just setting up the high-level structures that we need across the app. This also guarantees that before we import anything else in this project, these are definitely made. And then from .import views, that goes into our views file, which then imports our models file. And if we go into our models file from app import db, well, our db has already been made at this point, so we don't have that error anymore. And so the first, let's just do views here. Now that this has a dunder init file in it, this is a module in and of itself. So we can do from crimes.models import crime. We're being more explicit now, which is great. And we can also do from crimes import app. And that gets rid of our squigglies. So our web app in code is a full-blown Python app, or Python module package, whatever you want to call it. And then lastly, in our models.py file, we just replace app with crimes. So from crimes, import db. And I'm going to bet that since I have those Pylint things installed, it's not going to scream at me. It still screamed at me. So close.
There's actually the only way I found to fix it is to install a plugin for Flask for the linter. Just because the way that Flask does is it's dynamically generating the classes and everything, so the linter can't really handle that. But there is a plugin that you can get specifically for Pylints with Flask.
Okay. I know I've solved it elsewhere. I was just kind of pulling it for the pip installs, and yeah, it's not important. It's nice to have. It's not important for us today. Okay, we did some surgery. Let's make sure this still works. Just starting fresh. And instead of going to our crimes endpoint, I'll just go to the root. Oh, we need to change. So we changed where our app file is located. So we need to run back here, and we need to update our Flask app environment variable. And now instead of app, because it's not looking in app.py, we're looking in the crimes module, and then it's still app. Just like from crime import app, that's exactly what this line is telling our Flask command line utility. Get out of the way. So now when we run Flask, hey, that looks better because we're seeing all of our debugger warnings. Let's rerun this. Hello Python.
Wait, hold on, what?
Okay. What you got? Okay, so yeah, that's the update. The
Yeah, but I already updated it.
okay, so so you created a crimes folder outside. I was your thing is probably still in web.
So you control.
Put your init file there.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, so you're just in a different folder.
I'm on the root folder. I created the environment right there. Then I point the the Flask App to crimes :app.
Mhm.
I did that, and that's right here.
That all looks right.
So when I do that, and then I went ahead and said Flask development, and then Flask.
Well, that looked good.
Just warnings.
No exception still.
Was raised.
Oh, so from app import DB, you need to do from crimes import DB. That's back in the models.py.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's all you're missing.
that's what.
Okay, everyone ready to go? Need a little bit? Okay, so, our surgery, we're back up and running. We have a nicely organized file now, and you'll notice that it's even more explicit now. Our higher level organizational tools are in their own file. Our model is still in its own file, and our views, and even though we call it views, it's actually the controller, but convention. This is everything we need just for our routing and the logic to connect our data source, our model, to our views, either our JSONify or our templates. So let's continue with our crimes bit here. This shouldn't get the error now. So very quickly, what this is going to do, this crime is this is pointing back to our crime table connected to our database that we created earlier. We're specifying that we want to construct an SQL query against this object, this table. We're going to do all, which is equivalent to select star from crimes. And then we're doing .count, which just says I want the count of everything in this table. That should return just an int. I might be wrong in saying that, but hopefully this should work. So I'm going to go to -crimes, operational error. Okay, unopened to open database file. You know why? Because we need to go up one more directory because we put it in yet another directory. So back in our high level thing, I'm just going to add another pair of dots. Make this work for however you need to get it there. As I said before. Okay. And just to be thorough, I'm just going to Control-C out of that and reboot it. No such table crime. Okay. What did we call it? Was it crime or crimes? Was it crimes? Models. Yeah, we called it table name is crimes. I wonder if I can just copy that over. I believe I can just copy that over into our models here. It is just using SQL Alchemy. And still just, I feel whenever you make connection, or when you make changes in the database connection or the database architecture, it's better to reboot it. That's just me being superstitious. That looks a little better. It's at least hanging on something. Count takes exactly one argument 0 were given.
Well,
All right.
a different error. One argument, 0 were given.
Tempted to pull up the or actually, you know what's even better than documentation?
Stack Overflow.
Well, that's you're not wrong. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I can't do go to definition on there because it constructs everything.
No, we just removed the dot all.
Just not all.
Yeah.
I thought, but that was happened to me before.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Hey, okay. Okay, then I don't. Oh, because it wasn't able to connect to the database earlier or something like that. Whatever. Okay, so query.count. Hey, I just care that it works. If I'm not being paid for it, I just want it to work. It's done. I'm ready to go. Okay, so yeah, so we have the number of records here. We can put, if we wanted to, we could specify let's actually do crimes. Let's start creating a template where we can just have an overview. Let's just say, let's include the number of crimes since we've already calculated that, and let's just get the first 5 and display them on a web page. Fairly simple. So the first thing that we need to do, well, we've already pulled count out of here. Let's create something called head, where we're going to do crime.query.all.limit to the first 5. So this is creating an SQL query called select star from crimes limit 5. And now, instead of just, well, we can do, let's do, for the sake of just putting something up there, we'll create a regular just JSON payload endpoint for this data. But just to show that it is returning something, we should be able to do JSONify head, maybe. I'm actually going to print this out just in case, because I believe you might need to do for crime in head and then convert it into a string or convert it to a dict or something, because I believe head might be a query, SQL query object in this case. Let's just see. Should have already reloaded. Redo this page. It's still hanging. Okay. List object has no attribute limit. Error.
Let's just do
Instead of all, maybe it's just limit, query limit or head. So I had using things I haven't used in a while because it's usually just query.filter ID equals blank and with a blah 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 or something like that. That's much easier to do than these high level things.
We're not using the filter.
Okay, so dot limit did work. So we do need to object-based query. It's not JSON serializable. So, and if I look at my print statement here, above this error, we should have, there's our query statement. From crimes, limit, offset, Forget if we need to execute.
I mean, execute that's in like command or gun?
Let's do for crime in head. Oh,
Limit that all.
that. Okay, I was backwards on that. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I had that backwards. So .all is the thing that is actually executing our query here. We can change as many things as we want. Like limit 5, we can filter based on different things. When we call .all, it's going to select everything that fits these. So I'm just going to comment that out. Still not entirely sure that this is going to be JSON serializable. It shouldn't, because normally we would need to convert to a schema when exporting this data, and maybe we can get to that later, but actually for the time being, instead of let's do I'm just gonna say data equals, I think, let's just call the repr on each of the objects. By the way, head, when it calls, it's going to be a list of crime objects, just like what we had at the last session. We create the table called crime with the different columns in there, but when we get information both to and from the database, it is going to be a native crime object where we can just do crime.id, crime.timestamp. It's not a column necessarily. We're saying it is a column because we're defining our table structure using that object, but when we have an an initialized object that is a crime, it is an individual crime that we can play around with in Python. So I can call repr. I'm going to say lowercase crime, because uppercase crime is our table, for crime in head, which would be a list of crime objects, fingers crossed. And instead of JSONify head, I can do JSONify data. That should hopefully work. Restart it, no errors, great. Crime. So there we go. We have a list of the first 5 crime objects in our database, and the repr. Repr is just short for representation in Python speak, and we defined that last time by overriding our .repr function here, repr crime occurred at the timestamp, and we just copy that over into our models.py in our web app here, crime occurred at. So crime occurred at, here's the timestamp object from the native Python object. So, yeah, we took a break 50 minutes ago. It's 10:50 right now. Would you guys like to look at a schema definition, or would you like to take our 11 o'clock break now and get into schema on the way back? Okay. So what we can do very quickly, because did it say 11?
It's supposed to be 1. Okay.
Okay. Well, it's supposed to be 1. If you need to go at 11, we can take all of 10 minutes and do some more Jinja templating to use this list, and we can at least get something like that going. So for the time being, I'm going to copy all of this.
So, just FYI, some of us may need to have a small break to update the parking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take a break.
Let's take a break then.
Before you guys go, I'm going to put
Let's jump back into our views. So we have this count, and I'm going to rename head to crimes, and we don't need this data thing anymore because instead of JSONifying this data, we're going to create a template so that we can have a nice-ish, not pretty, but working HTML view, or we can see some of this data. So just like before, we do render template. We're just going to call our template crimes.html, and honestly, we don't really need count, or well, no, silly. Count. So we're gonna supply count, and we're going to supply crimes. And that's it for that. Okay. So we're going to create a new template file. We called it crimes.html. And now that we're just looking at the template, let's do one more thing, and we're going to create something called base.html. It's not going to be pretty, it's not going to be full, but let's show how this works. So base.html, we're going to create that basic skeleton that we had before. Actually, I'm just going to copy and paste hello into base here just because it has everything, but I'm going to get rid of all of that. So this is our template. I'm going to add something in the head here called title. This is just the thing that gets put in the tab of our web browser. And just going to say this OPD crimes dash codex. And then our body here, we're going to have a control block, and we're going to call this block content, and then another control block called end block right below it. And that's it for our template file here, our base.html. What this is doing is providing a base bit of template code to create the outline of our web page. And this block content there says that if anyone extends this base.html file, I'm going to look for a block of template code in that file that extends me that is also of block content, and I'm just going to put it in here, just as is. If there is no block content in that file, if it doesn't overwrite this block of code right here, then whatever we have in here currently will just remain there. So it can say no block, no content, no whatever. I don't think that's never going to get shown for us here. If we want, well, before we go back to the hello, the first thing that we do is we have another control block. At the very top, it extends, in quotes, base.html. So we're explicitly saying that crimes.html, when it is rendered, is going to start with our base.html, and then we can supply blocks to replace the content. So we had a block content. We're just going to create a new block with the same name called content. And content is not special. You can call it whatever you want. Content is also just one of those conventions. And also an end block at the bottom. Now inside of this block, we can put whatever the content of our website is. So like what we had before, we can create a header, OPD crimes, and a paragraph in here, total number of crimes, colon, and we can be ever so slightly fancy and create a bold thing here. We use our double curly braces to say whatever crimes is, we're going to convert it into, we're going to take the value and convert it into HTML. So this should say total number of crimes, colon, and then in bold, 174,000 and whatever the other three numbers were. Save this file, Anyone need this to stay up there for a little longer if you're following along? Okay. Gonna restart the web server here. And assuming that everything works, if I reload this page, because we're on -crimes, OPD crimes, told him, oh, I did crimes, not count. But you can see it did put in a list of our data in here. And by the way, when we did JSONify, we converted to the repr explicitly and it was a bunch of strings. If we don't do that and we just give it this list of crime objects, it's going to use that repr by default anyway when converting into a string. That's exactly what you're seeing here. So to fix this, crimes instead of crimes, because I was being a little absent-minded, we actually want the count. Reload. Total number of crimes. There's our count. Okay. I can create a new paragraph here. Let's just say some crimes with colon, or even better, let's do paragraph block, or no, not paragraph. Let's do say an H3 just to have something be small, a little bit smaller than the header on top. Make sure it matches, and now I'm going to create a paragraph that has an unordered list. Now, we have a list of crimes. We can iterate through that list by doing, just like in Python, for crime in crimes. And then at the very bottom, we have an end4 to break out. But inside of here, we can create a list item for every item that is in that crime list. We can say, let's say that the first part is bold, and we're going to give it the value of crime.number. Then crime dot, I believe we called it dot type for one of them. No, okay, offense type. Offense type at crime dot latitude. I'm actually going to put these in parentheses just for, remember, anything that is outside of these double curly braces is HTML. So I have a parenthesis outside of there, so we can have, we can make it look like a tuple, Python tuple of our lat long pair. Crime.longitude, save. So try to show everything in there. So here's what our template looks like right now. We know that our total number of crimes works. Now we have some crimes in here where we're creating an unordered list, which is by default is just going to show up as bullet points. For crime and crimes, we're appending a new list item into there with this information rendered as a string. Save, go back to this page, reload. So we have some crimes. Okay, crime.number did not. All right. Oh, did I? Oh, I absolutely did. That's a good catch. You'll notice that we didn't get an error for that though. If you have a code error in your template, there might be a way to tell Jinja to surface an error if you have something like that, but it didn't tell us anything. It just didn't work. So that's something you might want to watch out for. But yeah, crime.number, rerun. So there's our crime number or our case number and occurred at that latitude longitude pair. So here's the cool thing. We now have this basic crimes template. And all we're doing is supplying a list of crimes to this template where it then renders. Maybe instead of, so we can do total number of crimes. I can copy this line and say total number of crimes, let's say with filter. And we can believe I can just do len. There might be something different with Jinja. It's been a little while since I've called len on here. Let me just make sure that works. No, len is undefined. Let's check. Might just be something we need to supply as its own thing. I'm going to do Jinja2 length of list. Jinja2 templates. Okay, they're using a pipe in there. I know I've used that before, but it's been so long and it's such a weird syntax compared to normal length. Okay, so that should work. Okay, so total number of crimes with the filter that we've applied that we're showing in this list was 5 because we limited this response to 5. And just for the sake of being thorough, if we limit this to 10 instead and reload this page, we're now showing 10. So it can handle an arbitrary number of elements being passed into that template. Now let's add a filter. Let's actually do a query against this data. So I can, for the sake of time, not necessarily being really nice. Actually, no, I have a better idea. Let's just do this right. Like we did before, we can add a new route with, let's say crimes.type and then with ctype. That means something a little different in Python, but at least it's not a default value or a built-in value. So ctype is going to be a string.
You're using colon is supposed to be.
So, if you're not familiar, Python 3 function annotations. You say the name of the variable, colon, the type of the variable that you expect, and then you can do this equals none to still have our default value syntax.
Okay.
This is not evaluated at runtime, and as Python 3.8, this is removed entirely from any kind of compile time check whatsoever. You can put whatever value you want. It doesn't need to exist. It's mostly meant for static type checking libraries like MyPy. But it helps readability, because if I say I expect a string here, and you as a developer using this library, or me in 6 months who's completely forgotten about how to use this library, if I see string, oh, me when I wrote this expected this to be a string. It helps readability, and you'll notice, or when I go back in and make all of this stuff look really pretty, everything's going to have function annotations, everything's going to have doc strings, just like I have with the other workshops, but we're not doing that for right now. So, we still have our crimes thing here, but we specified crimes type ctype, and I have ctype string equals none. So if this gets called, we're still going to have our default value. If we do get type ctype, we'll get a value in here, just like we did with the hello name example up here. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of this crimes equals crime.limit all of that, what I can do is I can do if ctype, which means we have a non-null value, or we have a non-null and a non-empty value for our ctype. I can do crimes equals crime.query.filter, Yeah, that
No,
all.
no, no.
Is it? It's just filter. It's just filter. Okay. See, that's where the limit got me. Is they were, yeah, because normally it's just dot filter or dot get by ID, and it's yeah, whatever. So I can do. Oh man, these different libraries got me all confused. So I can do offense type equals C type, and then one last thing else there. So now, if we are given a type, a crime type, that's why I put a C in there. So offense type. No, if we're given a type of the crime, we're going to create our crimes, our list of crimes, crime objects here, by filtering based on that value. But if we're not given one, we're just going to pull the first 10 out of all of them, just like we have been. We're not changing the template. We're not changing any other code. All we're doing is adding a new parameter, a new route, and then handling if that value exists or not. So we can save that. Fingers crossed as usual. This reruns just fine. Now, if I do type slash, and I'm just going to look back to see what our values can be. Let's look at the clean CSV. That's church. That's offense category.
Next
I
one
don't have
is simple assault.
Yeah, so I think just doing some. Okay, so that space is actually going to. You know, I have a better idea. Instead of searching by offense type, maybe we just search by offense category. And categories are less likely to have spaces in there. And I would rather not have a whole bunch of %20s in my URLs when I can handle it. At least when I'm trying to do an example. Okay, so instead of offense type, we're going to do offense category. Hey, you know, C now stands for category. Ta-da! Whatever. Okay, so that reloaded, so I'm going to do that in there. Got an unexpected keyword fixed category. Am I getting my Django syntax mixed up? Because you should just be able to do filter based on that.
Google it is.
Yep. Alright, let's do Flask model. Filter. Records. Filter by. That's okay. So yeah. So here's what I was thinking of. Filter by uses these keyword, arbitrary keyword arguments as long as your key name corresponds to a column name or to a column name, then it should work. So instead of filter, we do filter by. So that should work now. Cross your fingers again. Okay, has no property offense category. What did? Yeah, this models. Did I misspell it? I absolutely misspelled it. I put a C in there. I can't spell. Okay. Okay. Base query has no lens, so maybe. First, we do need to put all afterwards. Django, am I? It's just you don't need to do that in Django.
That's it.
Filtered by. Well, so instead, we can do .first, we can do .limit.all or whatever there. We're just going to pull out all. It's probably going to give some very crazy number of examples, but whatever.
It's working.
It's doing something. This would be faster if the database was not on my machine, but it did work. So, of our 174,000 records in the database, 19,000 of them had the assault category, and we list every single one of them. This would be solved by something like pagination, or, well, it'd be solved with pagination, to be honest. Or maybe if we were querying something and then turning it into a map, maybe we would just subset based on here's the type category and the coordinates, and now you just have that D3 go ahead and construct my map for me, and that would be more succinct. But we are now using the exact same template as we were before, but now we're using it for a different web page, for a different number of crimes, different filters, all of that. Okay, 11:35. Let's turn this into an API response, just a JSONify, or let's JSONify this at a different endpoint, and then see how much time we have left, and if you guys want to do anything different with it. Just to go back to this hello.html, let's quickly convert this into convert this to extend our base HTML like we did before. And I'm just going to go back here and copy this, because it really is as simple as get rid of this. I'm just going to de-indent this for readability's sake, get rid of the end, and put my end block on here. And if we go back and do hello, ta-da, we're now using that. And you'll notice that up on the top here, it still has OPD crimes / codex, which we specified in our base HTML. So in your base HTML, that's where you put your head. That's where if you have a nav bar that stays consistent across your entire site, you would put your nav in there. If you were bootstrapping everything, maybe your content would be the thing that lives inside of your outermost container. That's as an example. But it's applying the same kind of functionizing, breaking up components into pieces that you don't need to keep copying and pasting everywhere, and just applies it to your front end. And then if you have any interactive components, you can still use these back-end templating frameworks to build your Vue, React, Angular front-end apps, just giving them the components that they need in order to then work on the client side. Okay, back in our views.py, we're going to copy this, and let's just prepend prepend JSON to both of these. So we don't need count anymore, because that was just for our template there. And we don't need return render template anymore. I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that this does something. Otherwise, we can look for a native schema implementation, or we can just create our own on these objects using a toDict method or something like that. Do JSONify primes. Probably not going to work. It's been a while since I've actually, yeah. And you are complaining because, oh, crimes data. can't have functions with the same name. That's all. Nope, don't want to. No, don't rerun that. Stop it. Okay. JSON is going to give me an error saying that type prime is not JSON serializable. So Django has lovely schema classes that because everything is built in. Let's look at how to do that in Flask. Otherwise, I would just come down here and do def to dict, something like that.
That's what I did.
I'm probably not going to be happy with any of the serialization methods or libraries on here, but Flask db model, yes, just do to dict, or it's to JSON, I suppose. Query result.all, but it needs to be an object. They're actually creating a serialized property.
Oh.
Huh. Return object data in, well, this is essentially the same thing as a toDict function. They're just calling it a little fancy. They're making it fancy. Yeah, that, you know, let's just do that. So, let's also be fancy. We did have this last time with this property attribute there. All this is doing is saying, I'm going to write a function called serialized that is going to be run every single time, and it returns a dict. I was mentioning before with the Swift style return syntax. Here's what this function returns. For ES6 in JavaScript, whenever you're doing closures, you can use this equals equal sign arrow for closures. Python for return uses a single. And all we need to do here is we can return a dict, and we can, because we're just writing, here's exactly how we're going to serialize this object, we can include or not include whatever data we want. I can do id equals self.id, and for just to make sure this works, we can also just include self.number and leave it at that for now. So we have a property called serialized that is this prime object represented as a dictionary which can be serialized into JSON. So back in our, I'm going to close all these open editors and okay. So back in views.py, we are going to convert these crimes into their serialized components using a list comprehension in this example. So we're going to do crime dot serialized for crime in crimes. I don't think this is the first time that I've pulled out a list comprehension in this workshop, but does everyone understand the syntax? It's creating a new function using a for loop in a single line. Technically, this inline for loop is a generator that is being converted to a list by these brackets on the outside. It's kind of cool. Because we could also do something like crime.serialize for crime in crimes, if crime dot offense type equals C type. That's another way that we could do it, but we can't do that here because our crimes exist in the database. So we'd rather just let the database handle that. So save that. We go back and rerun this. It should give us a list, ID 0, and then the number. So these are now serialized. We go back into our models.py. We can add other elements like our latitude, self dot latitude, copy paste the line, longitude, and reload this. Oh, colon. And now we have our latitude and longitude in there. We can go through and do this for every one of our fields. And even in the more managed serializers, let's say that we had relationships in here, or more importantly, if this was a user table, or an object that represented a user, and we were storing a hashed password, and we wanted to return this as JSON, we would make sure not to include that password hash in the response object of this user. Just as an example here. But this is now our first 10 objects in our crime table. We can go back to our type, our category type, and we search by category. Oh, I didn't spell that correctly, did I? Assault. Nope, I still didn't spell. I still can't spell. But now here's that list from before where it was rendered on at our HTML page, but now this is something that we can read into program because it's JSON. Everyone loves JSON.
Yes.
It's better than XML. Thank you very much.
I have one worse.
Okay, so frankly, this is everything that I thought out for this workshop. Does anyone want to anything more? Do we want to look at maybe a form post or something? Different HTTP methods. That is a great one. Yes, we're just doing GET requests. So in this app.route, I'm actually going to create a new endpoint for this. So we can do app.route, and I'm just going to say name. We did hello earlier. So implicit in these routes is the following. Methods equals get. That's the default. If we want this route to be a post, we need to overwrite this and say that this method only accepts posts. So we create our function just like we have before. We don't have any parameters in our URL, so we don't have any parameters in our function. And just for the sake of not having to create any more HTML templates, I'm just going to JSONify some stuff. And I'm going to put a default value in there for now, just my name. Okay, that's all back. So if we go to /name using our web browser, which is just get, URL exists, but the method is not allowed because get was not in our list of allowed methods in that route. But if I come to my REST client here, and I'm just going to create a new workspace. Create new request, name, it's a post. Currently has no body, but I send it to localhost on port 8000 -name. We get back 200 OK, name Michael. We have our default JSON payload there. Now let's say, now normally a post response, we are supplying the server with information. We're supplying with data. Maybe we want to create a new crime. I don't think it's probably best not to get into that example, especially because we have clean data in there, for now at least. Let's say that we want to include a JSON payload in this, where I want it to, I'm going to give it a name, and I want it to do something with that name. So I'm going to give it, let's say Charlie, and send it. Now it's not doing anything with that information yet. We can access that information by pulling it out of a request object. Now this request object has some special handling to it. It is in fact an object that does not need to be initialized. It does not need to be supplied as a URL parameter. All we need to do is do, let's just say, print request here, and if I send another request in, this is a request object that is specific to the request that came in. We didn't do anything special to it, and it really looks a little weird with the first couple times you see it in the code, because magically this request object that we just imported and never dealt anything with magically has the individual request that was sent to the server. We can pull data out of it, and if we send this in again, you can see that we have a byte representation, the raw bytes of the data that was sent along with this post request. Now, the data, that .data being in raw bytes is important because maybe that post includes a video, chunks of a video file or an image. You post an image to my profile. Well, that has to be raw bytes. Now, I believe there's also, .json, which will automatically parse a JSON payload in that post request into JSON data. So rerun this. Back over here, we can see that this .json is a native, or it has been deserialized from JSON into a native Python dictionary, which means I can now, instead of doing this name Michael, I can do, say, data equals request.json. I can do name equals, or name data name, just like a regular dictionary. And let's just say I want to count the number of characters in that name. I can do len of data name. Reload. So back over here, we call this again. Full screen this. We send a post request with this payload, name Charlie. we get back name Charlie and it has 7 characters in it. Change the name, different payload. So that's reading raw JSON, going into that endpoint. Now, if we had a form embedded on our web page, which if everyone's still good to go into a 1, we can embed a query form. So instead of putting the type in the URL, we can just put a text box with search me in our crime template there, and have our form it's more user friendly. Most users don't know what to put in a URL bar to make something work. There's no documentation, but they know what a text box is with a button that says "Search Me" next to it. So what we can do is we can go back to our crimes guy over here, and we can do methods equals, it accepts get and post, because when you submit a form embedded on a website, it sends a post request to the same URL. So now, if request.method equals post, we would be able to do, I believe it's request.form and we'll name it C-type in the form too, and I'm definitely gonna need to look up documentation on how to do that again, because that's been a while. But we would just apply C-type equals whatever coming off of our form is, and then that will be used instead of this here. And you'll notice we're not putting a post method on this type here. Maybe we don't need it. Okay. So I believe that's all we need to do in our view to make this work. Oh, now we need to go into our template, to our crimes.html, and we can put in a form. This is gonna be rough because I have not done this in a while. Okay. Form. Oh, that'd be, please.
So on the form, it would be
Like type equals text, or
yeah, type equals text, and probably put like name equals whatever you want to develop.
C type equals.
And then if you want to submit without using JavaScript, you would put like a button.
Yeah, button type equals submit, or is it on click, action, or type?
You actually don't have to put type if you have a button in the form.
Oh, okay.
It assumes it's the submit button. And then on the form itself, you would have an actions, like in the form and tag, actions and method. And that would be the URL that did in action.
Oh, okay. So this is actually a good use case for. Okay. So there's URL 4. So if we ever change the type of it, we would just do URL 4 crimes, which is the name of our function that this is associated with. And then, is it method equals post?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to think of anything else being fancy like label, or maybe in the text input, whatever default background texts in there.
Oh, that'd be
or
like placeholder.
placeholder.
On the input
Okay, that would probably be cleaner. Okay. Cross my fingers and hope that that works. Cool. Okay, so the HTML works. Search is doing something. Probably should put a limit on. There we go. Oh, okay. So all of that worked. First try. Yes. And then we probably could put something else in here saying if I pass in a C type, display total number of crimes with category equals blank. So we can actually do that right now. Back in views, all we would need to do is add. Let's put it over here. C type equals C type. Just pass it into our template. And then inside of crimes.html, we can actually make this, we can put an if statement around this. So if we're only ever showing the total number of crimes, so just here's the top 10 first crimes on there, this would never be shown, but we can do if C type, show total number of crimes with category our double quotes there, C type, and then we need to put an end if below that. Save. Okay. Reload, submit the form again.
I wonder why that query takes so long.
I don't know either. It's not like 19,000s is, my guess is just that it's the SQLite returning so many things and everything running on the same machine. But anyway, so total number of crimes with category assault, and I don't really have a way to get to this page without just going directly through the URL. But if we reload this, we didn't search with any category, so that total number of search query results line goes away. I think it's pretty cool how quickly you can make this stuff work. It doesn't look pretty, but as a guy as a back-end engineer, I like to make sure it works, and then someone else makes it look pretty.
That's fine. Yeah, if you ever need CSS in the Python workshop or group, happy to come. CSS and JavaScript.
Yes.
How would you do, like, let's say if we wanted to restrict the API endpoints, using, authorization KPI key or something?
Okay. So I'm actually going through this right now.
Is that something that like Django would do out of the box?
Yeah. So it's possible with Django, you can put absolutely everything behind a token or user password credentials. You're not Flask. It would be you're not going to more easily apply to everything without going through some kind of high-level middleware. Like technically, well, it's not middleware, but they use the same kind of syntax for setup. This db equals SQL Alchemy, and we just give it the app. If we wanted to run everything through cores, just make the entire site cores compliant, there's a Flask cores library where you from Flask cores, import cores, we could just create this cores thing there that honestly doesn't ever get used, but that line makes the entire application cores enabled. That's how you do the middleware for Flask. I'm fairly certain there is a middleware that you can set up to just put everything behind token credentials or something like that. I haven't used it personally. If we wanted to do that for something like this, I would think the easiest way to do that would be to create a decorator, a custom decorator, to check off credentials if they were present, and then we can selectively apply that to certain views. So we've been using this decorator syntax, but we haven't created a decorator in this workshop before, I don't think. Maybe the first intro day, but that would have been a real stretch at the end. A decorator is just a function that returns a function. That's it. It takes a function, wraps code around executing another function. So we can do, let's say, check off as the name of our decorator, and it takes a function. Then inside of that, we define a new function, and typically it's just called wrapper, and there's a library that or another decorator you can put on that, like wraps f, but whatever. And we're just going to pass everything through args and quargs. And if we just do return f args and quargs, and then back out here, return wrapper, this decorator is not doing anything at all right now. It's purely a pass-through. So to turn this into something that checks for, let's say, the existence of an authorization header or a token URL parameter, I think let's just stick with the authorization header. That's a little more standard. We can do something like, let's just do auth equals, we refer to our request object, dot headers, dot get, because it might not be available, and its authorization is the standard authorization header name. We can do if not auth or auth does not equal the string 1, 2, 3 ABC, whatever your token value is. Let's just say that this is a static token for accessing the site, just to be simple. It can get a little more complicated when you have individual user tokens, but the same function would work. The same decorator style syntax would work. We can do return JSONify, and let's just create an error of error not authorized.
Is there also a response object that gets passed into these
So
functions?
yeah, so well, JSONify. No.
Okay.
So libraries like Falcon, for example, they would, when you create a view, you would have a rec and a resp object that would be passed in, and then your function pulls things from the response object that got passed into that function, and then does resp.json equals whatever your payload, and then you don't need to return anything. It just, you magically applied things. In Flask, you need to return a response, either text or text, a tuple of a response / text and a response code,
Okay.
or JSONify. Yeah.
So
Well,
if you wanted to say like, this is a 401.
well, yeah. If technically, if not auth, we would do a 401. If the token didn't match, it would be a 403. So in theory, yeah, we could do if not auth, return an empty string and 401. That should work. If auth does not equal our token value, we can actually we probably could do that, but let's just see if this works. So if the authorization header is not present, we return a 401 response. If it does not equal 123 ABC, we return a 403. And if both of these checks pass, we just pass on, or we just call the function that this decorator wraps as is. So just to show this working, let's say we have check auth applied to our data payload, which is just at -json. Let's create a new request here. Oh, yeah, just data. Let's get. And this goes to /json. If we just try to send this right now, we are not authorized to access this resource because we did not put an auth header in there. Let's just say it's a bearer token. Actually, I think a bearer token. Yeah, basic auth bearer token. 1, 2, 3, or yeah, okay. That's there. We've now included it. It's not our token value. We are not authorized to access this resource. But then if we set this to be 1, 2, 3 ABC, oh, I bet it's including the bearer prefix. So we can split that prefix out by doing if auth dot. Why am I not typing? Okay. Auth dot split on the space explicitly, and we take the last item in there. So whatever the crazy prefix they want, it's just what's the value of the token, which shouldn't have spaces in it ever, ever, ever. Save that, send again, and then we get our data equals true payload. And just to show exactly what auth equals, I'm going to add a print statement in here. And in fact, we can do one more thing just to show this working. I'm going to say my response object is the value of whatever f returns. This is only going to work on our JSON payload here. So if I try to apply this to that HTML page, it's not going to work. But I can add, a token back to see what is the raw auth token that I gave or that I was given, and then we return the response. So this is doing a check before getting whatever this function returns, changing the response, and then returning it. So run all of this together, send, internal server error. Dang it. Never mind then. I'm just going to make this a print statement. I was trying to be fancy. That doesn't work because the response has already been JSONified. That's why. Because now it's a response object, so it's not a dictionary. I would have to do something else to it. I'm just going to add a print up top, print off, reload, run. It works again. Check back down here. Yeah, it prepended bear to our token value there. But as it stands, I can take this check auth wrapper and apply it to anything. So in theory, if we do you know how I can put a header, a custom header in a browser GET request? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So let's not do that to the HTML page over here, but we can apply that to our crimes routing. And by the way, for decorators, if they are made correctly, it doesn't matter what order you put them in, provided it's if you make it right. So I can put check off on top here, or I can put it below, whatever. But if we go back to our now let's just keep using this. I'm going to duplicate this JSON crimes. We keep our bearer token in there. I'm able to access the resource. If I disable the bearer token, so the authorization header is not added, oh, it didn't call it. JSON crimes. Well, maybe I do need to put this down here. Maybe order does matter. Oh, yeah, come on, what are you doing? View function mapping is overriding existing endpoint function. Okay. Then why did you work earlier? Yeah, that could be. If I comment that out, I wonder if that will work. No. Overriding existing. I don't know why. It worked the first time. It might just be that it doesn't like having this in here or something, but I've used this style of authorization check in production, and it works fine. I'm not sure why it's not working for this particular function. Yeah, it worked the first time around. There are other things that you can do with that request object. I'm just going to remove check auth from there. And I'll keep it in there as an example of, well, if you want to access the root of this thing, then you need that authorization header. You can access the URL parameters from the request object. There's just some cool things that we don't have time to implement in 45 minutes. I wonder, I bet we could get Flask Admin implemented in 45 minutes. What is that? So Flask Admin, I'm glad you asked. Flask Admin is an admin portal, and any database model that is registered with our database, we can check into our admin portal and then be able to change anything in our database without having to access the database directly. We just log in using user credentials, and we have an admin portal. I'm giving myself this challenge. Let's do it. That also means we're going to need to use migrations. So I'm going to do, let's do pip install Flask admin, uncures, whatever. Okay, so collected packages with what WTF forms and Flask admin. We're also going to need migrate, I believe. And for authentication, we might also need Flask user. Actually, maybe if I don't include. Let me just see if the admin portal works without authentication. Obviously, do not have an admin portal up without authentication. But for the sake of the demo workshop here, we're going to need to have an admin.py. No, actually, we probably don't need it. Or no, let's have an admin.py. It'll keep the imports cleaner. So let's go look at the documentation for Flask admin. And just like just like with the SQL Alchemy, we're going to initialize an admin object in our, yeah, just like here, admin equals admin. We give it the name of the app, and then there's other configuration information that we can supply it. But I'm just, yeah, just app.run, and then we're going adding the model views in here. This is actually this is what's going to be in that admin.py file. We actually we need to explicitly add the models that we want people or our admins to have admin access to into the admin portal, because otherwise it's not going to find it for us automatically. But pip installed Flask admin, so I can do from Flask admin import admin, and down here I can do admin equals admin, give it the app, and that's it for that. Now in admin.py I can do from crimes import admin, and we're also going to need from crimes, I think we do import models. Yeah, let's just do crimes.models import crime, because we're only importing one, keep it really simple. Do admin dot add, I think it's just add view. Yeah, add view. Oh, we also need model view contrib. That was going to not be good. So add that up there. Admin dot add view. We use this model view wrapper, and we give it our prime object, and we also, we're also going to need to do session so it can actually save any updates we make to it. So we just need to import db, and then we give it a db.session. That's a lot. That's a couple of imports for one line of code there, but we start with our crime object. We're explicitly saying I would like to use this crime table that we created before, and this db.session is a session object that Flask SQL Alchemy uses to, one, make queries, but more importantly, to commit any changes that we make. So we are explicitly having to supply it the session when creating this view. Now, this model view is taking this and turning it into a pre-rendered model table organizational view. We'll be able to query into individual crimes, as well as have a table view of all the information, and then a view of the individual crime itself with text boxes, bullet points, drop boxes, whatever we need to update the data in that object. And then we take that view, we add it into the admin object here, which is our admin portal. Let's check the guide over here. So we can also, just quickly with this thing, if we wanted to, we could put this admin portal in the same base HTML template, rather than using the base HTML template that comes with Flask admin. We don't need to do that because we're not really doing anything with the base template, but it's something that you can do. Basic auth, but we're not doing that. Please set up auth if you have an admin portal in production. But we should be ready to go, and by default it puts it at /admin. That is also configurable, but if we just rerun this app as is, it should run. Okay. And then if we go to localhost /admin, we have an admin portal. I don't know. Yeah, I don't. If it, oh, remember that bit about from dot import views where we imported the view, or we imported the view file, the routing, explicitly into our app? We need to do the same thing with admin, because this file, while it is being used, it is never imported. The code is never being run because it's not being imported by anything. So back in our init, just at the very bottom, we have this from dot import views. We just add admin to that, save it, app reloads, reload this page. Dang it. Oh, what am I missing here? Okay. I don't think we need to do name or what. Oh. Ha. I don't know if it's giving me an error anywhere in here, but can anyone see a problem with this import statement? Crimes has two admins. It has the name of the file, which would be a reference to this file, and it has admin in here. I'm just going to rename this to admin register, just so it's different. And let's hope that works. Not quite. But that also wasn't good. Okay, crimes import admin. I want to see if this is... Oh, you're absolutely right. So now it might have fixed this here, but yeah, we need to do admin register in init. Thank you. And now it sees that admin register there. Restart. Yeah, this direction. There we go. Okay, couple of different changes, couple of import gotchas, but it works. We now have this crime up here. We can click into that, and we'll get an admin view of the crimes in our database. This is using pagination, so everything is fast. If we wanted to, we can go and delete this. We can sort everything by address, or let's just say longitude, or if we wanted to look at all of the offense categories together. But more importantly, we can create a new one, or we can go in and edit one. So we've created an account portal. We downloaded data from an open data portal that has one of these embedded in it, and we've cleaned the data, and we've built out the same thing where you can now query some data, you can download some data, and as an admin, you can go in and update some data. Obviously, put the admin portal behind credentials. The Flask user allows you to create users. It automatically creates a users table in your database, which you can then extend using a mixin and some other things. The admin's really nice. On this page is empty right now. It only includes the taskbar, but you can extend this template to include things like a dashboard with as many objects are in there. Like we had that count of the total number of objects in the database. Maybe that's something that's really important and you want to see it on your dashboard. maybe you can put some graphs in here to see number of requests over time, or however you're tracking that information. You can track all that data in there. You can also, using Flask User, it has Flask User has roles assigned to each user. So you can say role admin. You can use these views to restrict various admins to only seeing certain tables. So if you give someone that has a role called access crime only, you can say you are only allowed to have admin privileges to view and make changes to the crime tab in your admin portal, and then they will not be given the rest of them. And as a bonus, if they somehow manage to find, they would get a forbidden error if they tried to access or make any changes by putting in a URL or anything like that. I think that's pretty cool. We can call it a little early, 30 minutes early. We got a lot done.
Thank you. That's the whole series.
Made it